not to worry, I'm here. I have shown up. For those of you who thought, oh no, he's not going to make it, I'm here. So this video might actually wind up being really the right message for a lot of people to hear. I feel like it is the right message to be communicating to people. I don't know necessarily that it'll wind up being hugely popular. I might actually get quite a lot of hate regarding this topic, but we'll see. I feel like it is a topic I wanted to communicate, and I had noticed that somebody who I watch on YouTube had really breaking down role play in a big way. So let's have a talk about this particular topic, and it's around using NPC voices and accents. I get this question, most YouTubers get this question. I haven't really delved into it very much, but I felt like I would talk about it today. And you'll let me know if there's any issues with the sound and so forth, and I'll do my best to correct them if I can. Now, how's it going? The Dungeon Fox early squad here. Where you at? I'm here. Hi, big kid. How's it going? Roots not font. Roots not. I think it's roots not. Something like that. The wait for the funny voices begins. I know what you're expecting me to do, a whole lot of funny voices, and I'm if that's what you were expecting me to do, a whole lot of funny voices, I suppose I could do a few funny voices, but I feel like that would detract from the message I'm trying to communicate for today. The Dungeon Fox. Okay, and we've got Sector Black here. Chase Watson. Okay, let's look. The room is full, so full enough. So let's get on. Now, normally with my live streams, you'll find that I put the start time down in the description, but they go unlisted. So unless you have your subscription turned on, your bell button clicked, and notifications turned on, if you're not watching the live stream or you have to leave, you won't be able to access it later on. So just be aware of that. All of the live streams are available to patrons on the Patreon page. And I do release these live streams as an edited version later on, but I cut out all of the Q&A at the end of the live streams, which of course you will have an opportunity to talk about with me. We'll definitely have an opportunity to have a chat about the topic in some sort of detail. Now, if you haven't been part of my live streams before, normally what I do is I'll present everything first, and then I'll open it up for questions and answers, and I'm going to follow the same format today, just because I think it's worked pretty well in the past, and I plan to do exactly the same sort of thing. Okay, all right, let's let's get cracking, shall we? And hopefully my voice holds up, because it's still struggling with the spring weather. Okay, there we go. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And the topic for today is Dungeon Masters not speaking in different voices or different NPC voices is a lazy practice. And I want to break this down, because when I say different voices, it's often viewed as a different accent. You're changing the way your voice sounds. The title of this video is quite unfortunate. It is in fact an attitude and opinion some people playing Dungeons and Dragons express and believe. And I want to address this particular topic, even if it seems a little bit painful. So stay with me and I will explain myself. It's become a prevailing belief by many members of the Dungeons and Dragons community that if a dungeon master who's playing the game and running a game can't or doesn't use different voices or speak in an accent, then they are not a very good dungeon master. In fact, that is often viewed as being quite lazy on their part. And if they're not using a voice, they absolutely should be working towards doing this. This really frustrates me. As a dungeon master who's been running games for many years, and somebody who has helped other dungeon masters become a dungeon master or play Dungeons and Dragons just as a player, it really frustrates me when I hear this sort of thing. Not only that, it actually makes me quite angry. And I want to make it clear that I do have a particular opinion of the concept of using different voices in Dungeons and Dragons. I have used different voices in my game in the past, for anybody who was wondering. It certainly has happened. The quickest way to scare people off and frighten them away from the role of being a dungeon master in a Dungeons and Dragons game is to insist and expect them to operate like a voice actor and to be able to change their voice and use accents and different voices for the NPCs. It's actually quite a difficult process to go through. And I really don't like that. I don't like the idea that we're going to wind up with people not picking up the mantle of being a dungeon master. I think that's a bad thing. I think that is something we want to avoid doing. The Dungeons and Dragons community needs more dungeon masters, not fewer dungeon masters. If we were looking for fewer dungeon masters, that would mean we had a surplus of them. And we don't have a surplus of dungeon masters in the community. In fact, we don't have enough. That's a simple fact. It's been going on like this even as the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons 5e progresses. The problem doesn't really go away. It's always there. Now, granted, Dungeon Masters for years, well before live streaming, well before Dungeons and Dragons became quite popular, and it has become quite popular, have been using different accents and different voices in their games, and in fact, many very good or great Dungeon Masters have never used an accent or voices in their games. And it didn't hurt their game, and it didn't detract from their game in any way. So what's going on here, and what is the issue? It's actually quite a narrow perspective to consider that a Dungeon Master needs to alter the way their voice sounds when they're playing a non-player character or monster or an NPC, and to view it as lazy. Now, I'm not going to dispute that it is a lazier form of operating as a Dungeon Master, because to actually learn how to do that requires a lot of effort, so I'm not going to dispute that. Okay, I think that's legit. But is that a bad thing? I don't actually think it is a bad thing. I think it actually makes an awful lot of sense, and I'm going to explain myself near the end of the video. There's actually nothing wrong with just role-playing an NPC or monster in the first person, but not changing your voice, or in the third person. You don't have to modify your voice to actually role-play a character. Isn't it strange that we have many actors who play different characters in movies, and yet they've never changed their voice, and they are able to portray themselves as a different character, and there's no alteration of the way their voice sounds. They use their standard voice, and they just role-play the character as if they are that individual. Now, I'm not necessarily saying you have to be able to do that. This is not what this video is about. It has nothing to do with what you have to do and what you should do. It's about, is it actually necessary to get the message across and have a good time playing Dungeons and Dragons and make it entertaining and interesting for your players? And I think actually, no. I think it can be done. You do not need to change your voice. You could say that the current trend of live stream games, such as Critical Role and Acquisitions Incorporated, and MCDM, so that's Matthew Colville Distracts Me, are responsible for focusing on voices, but actually it has nothing to do with them whatsoever. Actually, it has far more to do with the audience driving that expectation, because it's very entertaining. Dungeons and Dragons has become like a spectator sport to a large degree. So it's got nothing to do with Matthew Mercer or Chris Perkins or Jeremy Crawford or Mike Merles. Has nothing to do with Matthew Colville. Nothing to do with them whatsoever. It has everything to do with the audience watching that sort of thing on the live streams. That's what's driving that. Do we want to go and blame the Dungeons and Dragons YouTubers that are giving Dungeon Master advice? Well, you don't actually have to listen to what they're saying. You don't have to listen to what they are communicating to you. It is really up to you how you approach and deal with that information when it's presented to you. So I just want to make that clear, that a lot of this actually falls back on your own perspective and interpretation of what's going on and what's a good thing to do and what's important. Yes, I absolutely agree that players find it far more entertaining when you do a voice. But if you can't do a voice, I don't actually think that's a bad thing. Now, here's the reason and rationale that I have for you. Okay? It's clearly obvious that a lot of people like a dungeon master who will change the way their voice sounds. It's the flashy bit to being a dungeon master. It's the flashy thing you can do. But is it actually the most important aspect of role-playing an NPC? And honestly, I don't think it is. I think actually a lot of people get lost on that particular aspect. So here's why I think you should not worry about role-playing and using different voices or accents. This is completely my own opinion, and I understand if you want to just leave it, that's fine. But I don't think it's the most important aspect to role-playing any kind of NPC. It places quite a lot of extra strain on your voice. Now, everybody is different. The way their voice operates means that they only have a particular range that they can work with. Most dungeon masters who do a voice can only do a small range, maybe between 4 or 5 relatively different voices, and as they're placing strain on their voice box to change the way it sounds, because that's what's taking place, that's actually putting stress on them, their voice will start to slowly but surely get weaker and weaker and weaker. And you can't maintain it. I've found when I've done voices in the past, and I know a lot of dungeon masters find exactly the same thing, is you can't maintain it for a long period of time. There'll be a certain word or a certain series or sequence of words that you try to say, trying to maintain that accent or voice, and it breaks. Somewhere along the line, you can't maintain it. It requires a very skilled individual to be able to do that. So the repertoire and the range of voices you're communicating with, if you do an accent or voice, is fairly small. It's not a huge range, and it does put a lot of extra strain, which means you're going to have to drink a lot of water. You're really going to have to look after yourself. You're going to have to probably use a few tips and tricks to repair the damage that's done to your voice. In other words, you're going to have to stop speaking for a while so that your voice box actually recovers. So those are the most extreme aspects, certainly, I agree. But it is still a process where often when you've been doing voices, you have to sort of stop using your voice to help it recover. It requires significant training and understanding about how to look after your voice box, and voice actors have gone through this training process. Most dungeon masters will never go through this process. They certainly will never have the time, because it takes years. It takes quite a lot of time to actually develop that skill so you can look after your voice. And you know what's funny is that even individuals on the Critical Role team and who do voices, I have seen their voices crack. They'll put on a particular voice, they can't maintain it, and suddenly it gets lost. Suddenly it falls out of the range that they had set up, and so then they've got to speak a lot less. So it happens to even the most significant and well-trained individuals within the industry with regard to voice actors. It's going to wear out your dungeon master a lot faster. And now, when I say, I don't mean wearing out your voice. It's certainly, I've already said that's going to happen. It's going to wear out the dungeon master. They're going to get tired. You know, when you put on a voice and you change the way your voice sounds, it's actually using up a lot more energy. You know, not only do you need to focus on how you're communicating, but you have to do it in such a way that you can keep it up. You've also got to think about what the non-player character is going to say. So you're actually using your brain a lot more. You're forcing it to do a whole lot of additional things that actually require a lot of effort on your part. So don't be surprised if your dungeon master can't maintain a session for 4 hours and would prefer to play for only 2 or 3 hours, because that will often happen. I've found that the time frame for me as a dungeon master is getting shorter and shorter. Now I feel like 2 or 3 hours is really about as much as I want to actually run a game for, and I will take the opportunity to let the players communicate between each other rather than spend a lot of time talking myself as a dungeon master. Now, here is the thing that I really want you to focus on, and that is your focus should not be on how you say it, and that's changing your accent, but what the dungeon master says or communicates to their players as the NPC or monster. That's really the most important aspect. I've found that if I focus on changing my voice, I start to find it more difficult to figure out, well, hang on, I now have to improvise. I've constructed a few sort of lines of dialogue or a few things I think the NPC will say beforehand or during the session, but now I've got to work with the fact that I've got to improvise. I've got to work with my players. They might start pulling out a few things that I hadn't planned for, and now I've got to think about, well, how do I communicate that to my players' characters so that they understand, and how do I stay within the parameters of the character that I've set up in the first place, my NPC, because there'll be a whole lot of parameters I've set up, personality traits, bonds, ideals, flaws, motivations, and other aspects that I might have put into my character. And those are very sort of basic aspects to it. I don't want you to worry about changing your voice and doing a different accent if it would deter you from being a dungeon master. I think that's one of the worst things that could possibly happen to our hobby and the community as a whole, if suddenly we start focusing on those aspects rather than the really important stuff. So if it's going to deter you as a dungeon master to be a dungeon master because you feel like you have to do a different voice for all of the NPCs, I think that's a bad thing. It's going to create unnecessary strain and stress on yourself. And it's not just on your voice, it's not just on making you more tired and wearing you out so that the game session will be shorter, because that often will be the case. What you'll find is that all of the butterflies, I don't know if all dungeon masters get this, but I know when I was starting out as a dungeon master, and when I, even after a few years, after I've sort of past the bloodied stage as a dungeon master, I would get the butterflies in the stomach. I don't get the butterflies in the stomach anymore, but it's certainly creating a lot of additional stress that you really don't need to expose yourself to. Now, I think that Matt Colville is a great example of a dungeon master who goes through the process of communicating to their players how an NPC will operate. He works very, very hard on that. But have you noticed that Matt Colville doesn't really change his voice? It's very rare to see that take place. He's focusing more on what the NPC is saying rather than on the way that it is said. And this is something I really want you to understand when it comes to changing your voice and the importance of it. It's not very important, it's the least important aspect. Now, Matt Colville on his channel recently did a video called Roleplaying. I think it's running the game number 83. And if you haven't watched that video, it actually highlights this very topic. And I saw that and I thought, this is the time to try and do this video, because he's saying exactly what I've always considered to be an issue with regard to changing your voice. So if you haven't gone and seen his YouTube channel and watched that video, I want you to really consider doing that. It is a fantastic video. It communicates everything really clearly, makes it explicit and clear. Now, I'm hoping that people stayed with the video, and if you found this useful or helpful, I understand if some of you still need time to sort of process this, or you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine, I understand. I would say I have hundreds of videos for players and dungeon masters, hundreds of videos that provide you with really practical advice for playing your Dungeons and Dragons game, and you're welcome to go and check them out. I'm sure you will find them useful if you're still with me. Now, if you want to support the channel so I keep doing videos like this, then you can check me out on Patreon, where you can get access to the unlisted live stream videos that I do, additional content, and priority on the video content that I make on my channel. I certainly do that. I also have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon where you can buy stuff online and I get a small commission. I have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And I want to say just a quick call out to Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. It is a fantastic book. You can get it as a digital form or as a paperback cover, and certainly it has lots of really smart advice for those of you who are trying to make your life a little bit easier as a dungeon master and don't have gobs of time or huge amounts of skill to actually do things the way that a lot of other dungeon masters are trying to operate their game. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, I'm back. I'm here. Let's have a talk about doing funny voices and changing the way your voice sounds and generally sort of doing things slightly differently. I'm just, oops, sorry, bear with me. I'm aware that since I've had my hair cut, I look very, very, very bald and I am going to hide that. So, okay, so back to my voice. Let's have a look at the chat. Throw out your questions. Let's have a discussion, and we'll go from there. And it's time for me to have a drink of water because, hey, I need to. I really need to. Okay, where are we? We are here to look through the list. What have we got here? Chase is here. Hello, Chase. Dungeon Fox. You inspired me to start my channel. I love you. Oh, that's great. What sort of content do you do, Dungeon Fox? I would be interested to know. Let me know. Certainly. Okay. No, sound is good. Sound is good. Cool. Essa, I'm going to have trouble with this name. Essa Harden. So here's one of the things I always found difficult. When you change the sound of your voice and you're dealing with players who have gone out of their way to make the most complicated and difficult sounding, it's a name that has like 3 or 4 syllables that has to be pronounced in a particular way, and it just breaks your voice. As soon as you try to pronounce that name with your NPC when you're communicating with them, it all just falls apart. So it's one of the hazards of trying to do a different voice. Hello, Darren. How you doing? Okay, M. Kurzman. Hi, how's it going, M. Kurzman? All right, feel free. I will answer questions, whether they are player or dungeon master questions. You go for it. Alec is here. Hello, Oscar's here. I'm not sure. You retracted the message. Okay, maybe you just punched it in wrong. Okay, that's fine. Oscar. I sometimes use voices, but sometimes just speak in third person. The players are okay with it. Yeah, I have found. Okay, so here's an example. I had a player who there was a unicorn in the game, and they said, I'm going to talk to the unicorn. I have a spell that allows me to talk to the unicorn. Can you talk like the unicorn? And it was appalling. He thought it was wonderful. But I couldn't maintain it. And often that's the case. I find myself with the first 1 or 2 sentences of dialogue starting out that way, and then I have to transfer back into my own voice before I just stumbling over myself. It takes a lot of practice to change the way your voice sounds and to be able to say a lot of different words. And then, of course, you've got to deal with all of the other processing brain power required to communicate as the NPC that you're running. Okay, Darren, I switch between voices and no voices. Yes, depends on how much energy I have at the time. Exactly. Darren, you have just illustrated the point that I wanted to say. It actually taxes a dungeon master to try and do different voices, and so therefore it will wear you down, and so sometimes you just can't maintain it. And it's not a big issue. I know some players are insistent that there must be a different voice for every character, But as I have said before, there are plenty of movie actors who never change their voice, and they have played different roles, and they have been completely convincing to an audience and done very well. Okay, so you don't have to change your voice. Anthony Hopkins, a good example. And he's still going at it. Samuel L. Jackson, still going at it. And he has never changed his voice. And he does really well as an actor. Okay? All right, so now remember, voice actors have to change their voice because they are playing a character with a different image than themselves. And it's also part and parcel of their requirement, because a lot of game companies and animated companies want that sort of thing. They don't want necessarily just your normal voice. Let's think about it. Could you imagine what would happen if Samuel Earl Jones were to change the way his voice sounds? People watch him and listen to him, even if they can't see him, because of the way his voice sounds. And they don't want him to change his voice because it's already got enough charisma and enough impact, and it's pleasant enough to listen to and interesting enough that he doesn't have to do anything with it. So that's what I want you to go with. I want you to communicate in a way, if you can and have the time, in a way that draws the players in. And I found that I've had people at my table communicate to me and say, look, I know you don't really do voices, but I really feel like I was talking to the character because you were speaking in the first person. And I was having a dialogue with you, and the things that you were saying, I really felt like that person was sitting at the table with me, or they were in the scene with me. And that's actually one of the most important aspects to the game. Hi Jay. Well, how's it going? Alright, Aaron's here. Okay, I use voices, but I have a problem replicating small NPC roles from session to session. You see, there's another thing, right, is often to keep and maintain the NPC voice that you have selected from one game session to another is actually very difficult to do. You might find it changes. I've had players and dungeon masters comment on that sort of thing in the past in terms of being able to do that. It's a really good point, Aaron. Being able to maintain that voice from session to session can be very, very difficult. Darren, sometimes I forget the voices I use unless I make notes. Exactly. And even if you do make notes, you might find it's not quite the same as it was the first time round. Fred's right about the water. Makes a lot of, you do need a lot of DM breaks. And it won't just be to drink water. You'll find that you'll have to put something else down your throat to actually sort of calm it down. Often, I know that a lot of people would drink like lemon and honey, and they would eat something that would take the roughness out of their throat. I've even heard of dungeon masters who would have a throat lozenge, to sort of help ease the tension on their throat because it's been working so hard. So, very important aspects. Jay, well, it's used okay as long as I follow through with some warm lemongrass tea and honey. See, Jay's just made that very, very point that I was talking about before, and I hadn't even read your comment. So, Jay, you make a very good point. It's really important that if you're going to try to put extra strain on your voice, that you look after it. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a problem. What's worse than a dungeon master who can't speak because they've tried to do different types of voices in the game? I've got to stop now because I'm losing my voice, and you've been playing for 2 hours. Okay, Aaron, why you show Mr. Perkins when you talk about a worn-out DM? Okay, so the images that I presented to you, okay, He's joking. I know you're joking, but I want to make it clear for anybody who thinks that the images that I presented during the live stream or during the video are my perspective on a dungeon master. I selected images of dungeon masters that I knew that most people are aware of, who are familiar to you, that many people who are dungeon mastering aspire to be like. So I selected Gary Gygax, Jeremy Crawford, Mike Mills, Chris Perkins, Matthew Colville, and of course Matt Mercer, because I know that you guys probably are aware of their impact on the community and the way that they dungeon master. And I know that's a lot of the reason why we get these questions is people trying to aspire to be more like them, rather than it's not a detraction, it's not a bad thing. Okay, I totally understand wanting to be more like essentially what is sort of a role model to you, but it is more important about what you say rather than how you say it. Sector Black. Agreed, it's a bad outlook. I personally like to, and yeah, it's tough that people think 1 minute you sound like Joel, is it Joel? Joel Belgruff, and then suddenly you're Gollum. You feel that afterwards, yes, yeah. And of course, the more you maintain that voice, the more your voice will change because of the strain being placed on it. It's a really important, voice actors learn so many different things to protect their voice. We usually play for at least 6 or 7 hours, most times around 12. See, 6 or 7 hours of being a dungeon master. You know what I found interesting is when I do put on a voice and the players like it, they will not kill that NPC. It doesn't matter, even if it's an individual who they feel is a threat to them. They just want me to keep speaking in that voice. And this happened to me years ago. And in the end, I was like, it was one of those times where I really felt like it would be much better if the players just butchered this old troll so I didn't have to keep speaking in the voice. In the end, I just dropped it, and they were like, but we liked the accent, we liked the different voice you did for it. And I was like, yeah, but I can't maintain that, and I'm not going to keep playing to that because that's what's your focus. Your focus is to help move the story forward. And in the end, they accepted that, and wound up bringing that old troll on board into their party, which was quite peculiar. I've never come across that sort of thing before. Right on, no. Woof. Okay, woof, Jay, woof. That's a lot. I usually go for 2 or 3 to 5 to 6 hours max. 5 to 6 hours is still a long time. Aaron plays for about 2 or 3 hours, 4 times a week. So yeah, if you were running games for longer than that, you probably wouldn't be able to maintain 4 times a week. 4 times a week is a lot of games, Aaron. I remember doing that. It's hard work. We stop for dinner around 6, so there's that. But while everybody is eating and chatting, I am still on game stuff between bites. I would imagine too that you don't do a lot of talking. Your brain is working rather than your mouth. The Dungeon Fox. Wish I could be a patron. I'm broke. No problems. I'm broke too, Dungeon Fox. Don't worry about it. It's all good. Just keep watching my videos. That's the main thing, right? Keep watching my videos. Keep liking the stuff that you're liking. And it's not like everything I ever make on YouTube is going to be something everybody likes. That's a reality. I make a very broad range of topics, and I do not voice necessarily the thing that a lot of people within the common community believe are the best things to communicate. As the likes are indicating, I've got 13 ups and 2 downs. So I am not going to play to the community who feel like using a voice is important. And in no way did the title indicate that I was going to teach you how to talk in a different type of voice, because there's a whole lot of stuff that goes that comes well before that, well before you even start talking in a different voice. And I can't communicate that because I'm not a professional voice actor, and I don't pretend to be. You need water because this is a funny voice that you do for videos, or just lots of straight talk. Well, I'm talking a lot. And I'm working my way through the chat, but for the last half hour, I have talked non-stop. So I have to keep drinking water. Now, if I were drinking something like lemon tea with honey, but I can't have honey, so I can't benefit from that. Rivers RPG channel. Hey, well, how's it going, Rivers RPG? Walrus, how's it going? Even Mercer doesn't do a voice for every single NPC. Walrus, very good point. That's exactly true. He doesn't use a voice for every single NPC. And there are times when even he has struggled to maintain that. And he's probably got the strongest voice within the Critical Role team. Vasadine, I think that's how your name is pronounced. I tend to forget what darn accent I'm doing, and the characters' voices shift on a dime. Ha ha ha. Yeah, it's common. And I would not beat yourself up or anybody else about that happening. It's just part and parcel of the whole process, especially if it's back and forth between an NPC. So here's the thing. I do not like when a dungeon master has to communicate between one NPC and talking in character between one NPC that a dungeon master is playing and another NPC, where the players would look on and watch this play out. I feel like it's a ridiculous situation. It's quite peculiar. I don't ever recommend that dungeon masters do that sort of thing. I recommend that you simply summarize that situation and have your NPC play one NPC and communicate that NPC with the player's characters. If there's a couple of different NPCs that they can talk to, that's fine, but you don't have to have a communication between NPCs, more than one NPC, with yourself. It looks ridiculous, and it's a whole lot of extra work that you don't need to go to. The Dungeon Fox, what do you got here? Any advice for me? I'm currently doing D&D story videos and plan on doing something similar to Critical Life and the Life of the Party. Okay, D&D stories. I don't really do Dungeons and Dragons stories, primarily because it's very hard to make a Dungeons and Dragons story sound interesting and entertaining unless you take quite a lot of time to put it together. And I've never been really great at telling stories about my own games, let alone even remembering. I mean, there's lots of things that have happened in my games, but to remember them and communicate them, I probably couldn't give you much advice on that. So yes, I don't really think I have any advice for that. And I don't really live stream my games because, my players don't really want that, and I don't really have the equipment to be able to pull that off. It's something that somebody with a professional studio and lots of money can pull off, and I don't have that. Sorry I couldn't help with that. The Dungeon Fox. I want to do more voices for my RPGs. Yep. So my suggestion to you, if you want to focus and develop that area, is go and talk to or watch some of the content that Matthew Mercer has talked about his process. Even Chris Perkins has talked about his process. The DM Lair has talked about his process. For those of you who watch his channel, he does quite a lot of, he does a lot of skits, and he will play a character very quickly. But most of the communication with the NPCs that he plays are like one sentence or just a couple of words. It's very short and quick, and it's over and done. Fire Lord Singer. Don't be lazy, DM. I laugh out loud. My throat is actually sore because of my last session. PCs in Menzo Baranzan, Dark Elf voices. Yeah, Fire Lord Singer has just communicated the very issue with doing different voices. So it's a risk you place yourself in. Because now you've got to... I've seen dungeon masters who had such a sore voice that it was actually painful too. So you need to look after yourself. I love your videos. I am currently running 3 groups through the Curse of Strahd. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine doing that. I have been using voices but have been having trouble keeping track of the voices and even coming up with voices for all of the NPCs. So here's the thing. There are so many characters or NPCs in the Curse of Strahd. To have a completely different voice for every single one of them would just be way too hard. And because most people's voice box can only really change its sound by maybe a small degree, that means that without putting huge amounts of stress on your voice, you can only really do about 4 or 5 different voices. So focus less on the voice and focus more on how that NPC communicates with the player's characters. You know, as I said, movie actors do it all the time. They never change their voice. They simply play the character differently. And, you know, how they respond, those sorts of things are really important. Walrus, 2 fingers of whiskey in a tumbler is great for the DM. Just saying. Well, I'm not going to dispute that. I haven't tried it myself, but okay. Loosens the tongue and great for the throat. All right, so he's trying to provide some good advice on how to take the stress off your voice. Oh, good. Worn out DMs holds up mirror. Okay. All right, fair enough. I do more voices as a player rather than a DM. Well, here's the thing. As a player, you're probably going to be speaking a lot less because there's, you know, anywhere from 3 to 6 players potentially at the table, and you can't be talking all the time. The Dungeon Master, out of everybody at the table, is probably going to be speaking more than anybody else. With, you know, in terms of individuals, when you break it down to which individual at the table is going to speak the most, it'll be the Dungeon Master. So therefore, you know, it's much easier to pull off as a player, and you don't have to change the voice that you're communicating with. You can keep it within a certain range, and you don't have to worry about losing it because you're only playing one character. Yeah, you've noticed that too? Yep. Cool. Voice armor. You need voice armor. I need to make notes for what voice I'm using for each NPC. Good idea. Yeah, notes is always fine. As I said, I don't want to focus on giving advice on how to change your voice because right now I'm losing my voice. I've been just talking non-stop for 40 minutes and I haven't really changed my voice at all. I'm just using my normal voice and I'm starting to lose it. So you can see what I'm talking about, right? Now, a Dungeon Master should never be talking as much as I am. Otherwise, why would the players even be sitting at the table? That would just be hugely boring. We had a game that ran out for about 13 hours once, and we were still rearing to go, except for one player who was asleep at the table. Well, I've been a Dungeon Master and a player who's fallen asleep at the table. It happens. Particularly if you're working and you go from work and then you start running your Dungeons and Dragons game. It can certainly happen. My players adopt this 10-year-old boy into their party and the high pitch is crazy. Interesting, Dungeon Fox. Big Great Sword. How do you maintain the players' attention and still have fun? Love your channel. Hey, thank you. Okay, so what I found with maintaining your players' attention, it really comes down to how you present things. What you want to do, I've found, is I communicate in like 2 or 3 sentences. I try to get the information to them as fast as possible and then stop talking and let them participate. When it comes to an NPC, I don't really roleplay an NPC unless it's an interesting NPC. So, for example, the shopkeeper is probably not an NPC I will roleplay because it's really just about shopping. Pardon me, bit of gas. So my suggestion to you is get your NPCs to say something that's interesting, that draws them out. If you keep your dialogue relatively bland and it's not unexpected, then that's sort of an issue. But honestly, the easiest way to maintain players' attention is to simply play the character rather than play the voice. Play the character, not the voice. Get rid of the gimmicks. Exactly. The voice is the gimmick. And work with the real stuff. Hi, Save or Die. How's it going? Dolphus Colin. Essential kit video will be coming when? Well, I don't have the Essentials kit yet. It only became available for purchase as of like yesterday for me. And it takes 3 or 4 weeks, provided that it doesn't get lost in the mail or get dumped in a wet puddle or kicked around by whoever, for it to come to New Zealand. Mighty Ape, we're supposed to be releasing it on 3rd of this month, and they've clearly, because I live a long way away, either the shipping process is probably going to take it anywhere from 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even longer before it comes here. So I've purchased my book through the book depository because they are slightly cheaper, free shipping for me. Now, if I was in the States and I was buying $35 worth of product, then of course it would make more sense to buy it through somewhere like Amazon because their price would be cheaper. But with freight, it doesn't work out that way. So it's going to be a little while, and I will do them as soon as I can. But like anything, remember, this is not my full-time job. I can't survive on YouTube. I will put out stuff as quickly as I can. I like channeling Sir Christopher Lee. Great voice. Yes. Yeah. There are so many actors who have a great voice that don't need to change their voice, and it's still engaging and interesting. So play the character. Don't worry so much about the voice. It's really just a situation that naturally occurred in the spur of the moment, but yeah, it's 100% ridiculous. Yes, it can be ridiculous. And if you've been a dungeon master, you'll be aware of some of the problems with trying to maintain a voice. But, as I said, go and watch Matt Colville's video on role-playing that he just put out recently in the last day or so. It's fantastic. It highlights all of the really important aspects of role-playing, NPCs and even a character, but certainly for a dungeon master, making them understand what's going on there. Touches on, yes, the players end up having to take a backseat while I have this dialogue with myself and then become the audience. Yes, we don't want our players to become the audience. Now, with a live stream process, there is an audience, and of course, they want that. But you are running a game for yourself. You're not live streaming, okay? And if you are live streaming, that's really up to you. But players at your table, they don't give a toss about what the live stream audience cares about. Have anybody noticed that those individuals on Critical Role and a lot of live streams do not pay attention to what the audience that's watching them say? The audience, will type in their chat and so forth, but they don't pay attention to them. They just play the stuff that they find engaging, interesting, and fun. And that's the important aspect of it. Bromos Sunstar Ranger. Talking in character is ridiculous. Don't do it. It adds nothing to the story or immersion. Work on your character, vocabulary, and personality. Add much more than the voice sound ever could. Yeah, work on what you are saying rather than how you say it. Thank you for that. Thank you for backing me up on that, Bromos Sunstar Ranger. Certainly. Destructible Me. Planning a 2 to 3 session story with newbies based around the most dangerous game. Oh, okay. Sounds interesting. A friend of mine, a long-time DM, says, let your player characters tell the story. Predictable is boring. Have an outline is better than a colour by numbers predictable table. Some dungeon masters need that though. I would like to think that eventually people can work away from the paint by numbers or work, just because you are running the adventure from a pre-made adventure, you do not need to run it exactly as is printed in the text. Just something to bear in mind. You can play with it a bit. It's your tool. The Great Big Sword. Only my big bad or main NPC have a unique voice and all the deities. So you have been selective about who you think should have a different sounding voice. Destructible Me, really great tips. Got in a late going to rewind to the beginning. Cheers. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, I think that's it. I am about to, it's been 50 minutes. I haven't changed my voice. I couldn't even now even try to engage in changing my voice. I would lose my voice. Now, that means, I want you to understand, all of those Dungeon Masters on YouTube that you watch, when they do those videos, you might well find that they have to do those voices in chunks. They won't necessarily do it all on one day because of the extra strain and stress on their voice. It is also more than likely why Luke, over on the DM's Lair, when he does his skits, only says very small sentences. It's like 1 or 2 sentences. It's not a lot. He does his voice. He dressed up as that character. He presents himself, and then he moves on to the next one. And all of that is done very quickly. So that's something to bear in mind. Maintaining it is very, very hard to do. Okay, I think that's it. I think we've covered the topic. I am perfectly aware that there will be a few people who are really bummed out and thought that I was going to be talking about a completely different topic, and that I would be talking about how to talk in a different accent and give them some tips. But actually the message for this is that you don't need to do it. And in fact, I discourage you from doing it because of unless you have done a lot of practice and you look after yourself, it's probably not going to be the best option for you. Be selective. If you're going to use a voice, be selective. It's perfectly fine, and it's not lazy. You're looking after yourself. Okay, so goodbye to all of you. So wherever you are in the world, where it's the morning, afternoon, night, look after your family and your friends. Thank you to everybody on my Patreon page and everybody who came and watched my video. Thank you very much. Make sure to look after yourself, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.